Meghan is an agent of poison. She is a person who has absolutely remorseless in her hatred if she doesn't decide that someone should be neutralised and destroyed. The Sussexes have moved on. They don't care to hoots whether he's frankly alive or dead anymore, and probably they prefer him to disappear. The palace played it appallingly at that stage and landed her with that dreadful situation where she did the Photoshop photograph, which was just a tragedy. Whenever they need money, whenever they need publicity to stoke their reputation, they'll drop another little bomb. I mean, we're still waiting, of course, for Meghan's own autobiography. That is the ultimate weapon she can deploy.
Hello, I'm Matt Wilkinson and welcome to our show, Royal Exclusive. With me today is biographer Tom Bower. Hi Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
Right, let's get started because we've got a lot to talk about. I want to get started on Thomas Markle. Now he's a man that we've both met, we've both spoken to, probably have certain thoughts and feelings about. What's your feelings towards Tom? He's almost it's his 80th birthday this week, almost forgot to say. He's turning 80. How do you feel about Tom? He's almost the forgotten man in the kind of royal row. That we forget that there are two warring families here and that Thomas Markle is at the heart of one side.
Well, I feel intensely sorry for him. I mean, he is a very decent man, hard-working. He was a wonderful father. Meghan owes him such a lot, and she's treated him appallingly. She's treated him in a way which is just totally unwarranted. And there he is sitting in a rather shabby cabin in New Mexico, and he doesn't deserve what she's ladled out.
When I met Tom, as I say, I kind of felt a little bit sorry for him. It's his 80th birthday. Meghan's several hundred miles away. It would be quite an easy thing for her and Harry to either drive down or give him a call or send him a card. Do you think that could ever happen?
No, I mean, Meghan is completely unforgiving, and Harry has behaved appallingly towards his father-in-law. And unfortunately, I think it's not just these phony photographs, but it's all to do with snobbery and everything else. You know, he is a retired man, he hasn't got much money, and Meghan is just famous for dumping people who don't suit her profile anymore. And I just feel as well that her mother poisoned the atmosphere, most unfairly as well, because Thomas was very good to her. And in the end, he's a great man, a good man, who is going to spend the rest of his life wondering why he has been treated so badly.
Well, you paint a picture of this in your book, Revenge, where you list many occasions where Meghan has, I think we call it ghosting someone, where Meghan, I think there was one incident you report in your wonderful book where when she was a child, she would give a silent treatment to one of her friends. She would almost turn her back on her until her friend decided that she would speak to her again. I mean, this is her behaviour. This is what she does, but this is her father.
It is her father, but she did the same to Harry and his family too. I mean, Meghan is an agent of poison. She actually is able to destroy relationships. And when she cultivates relationships, it's always for her own good, her own purpose. So she's not actually someone who's any generosity of spirit. And it is really one of the great sadnesses of this whole saga that in the end Meghan has destroyed the relationship between Harry and his family, just as she has destroyed the relationship with not only her father, but also her half-sister.
I think with Meghan, you know, I've been devil's advocate, but I feel a little bit of, I can understand possibly that she feels a bit betrayed by what happened with Thomas when he was, you know, making those paparazzi pictures just before her wedding. There was obviously a lot of stress going on with Meghan. She's spoken about, you know, the stress that she was going through before the wedding, and I don't think, you know, those photographs really, the stage photographs really helped. I mean, is Thomas maybe to blame for the fact that Meghan doesn't talk to him? Does he hold a little bit of the blame, maybe?
No, I don't think at all. I think what happened was in the run-up to the wedding, he was just abandoned, whereas Doria, her mother, got a lot of help from the palace on what to do, how to cope and everything. He was absolutely besieged by journalists once they found out where he was living, and no one came to help him. And even when he had his heart attack and wasn't able to get to the wedding, no one was there to help him. So I think that the palace behaved appallingly towards him, abandoned him, very much, I think, because Harry and Meghan themselves just weren't there to help him either. They just thought he was someone who could be ignored, and that was a great tragedy for him, and I think also for the royal family.
You talk about being ignored. I mean, Thomas, over the years, has spoken out, and I think that Meghan has kind of got frustrated at times. But that's all he has. You know, if his daughter's not talking to him, then that's all he has is to speak to the media and give his side of the story and try to get a message towards Meghan.
Well, yes, we've got to remember another thing about it. Meghan's mother deserted her when she was 2 years old. No one ever saw Meghan's mother at school in all her years, both at primary and at secondary school. So Thomas, working phenomenally hard as a lighting director, always made sure that he was at home then for Meghan, took her out at weekends, paid for her schooling, paid for all the things, including her union ticket, to become an actress. So suddenly, to be treated in that way, so ungratefully, so spitefully, just has completely shattered a man who in the end doted and worshipped his daughter. And he can't understand it. And he just thought that the letters and the things that Meghan publicised about what a terrible man he was completely unwarranted. And of course, that's the indication of Meghan. I mean, it's not just obviously her father. She did the same to the Queen. She did the same to Princess Kate and to William. She is a person who has absolutely remorseless in her hatred if she doesn't decide that someone should be neutralised and destroyed. And that is her strength and, of course, her weakness.
You paint that quite well in Revenge about the amount of effort that her father went, you know, as a single parent, you know, the amount of money, giving a roof over her head, the support all the way through university. I mean, Thomas maybe feels now's the time. Now he's ill, and he is seriously ill. You know, we've both spoken to him, been out there and met the guy. He's not a very well man. Now is the time, as 80 years old, that he, you know, a parent would expect their successful daughter, but not only the successful daughter, but also his son-in-law. I mean, does Harry need to maybe reach out to Tom at some stage? Because he's never met him.
Never met him, but I think it's too late for all that. I mean, the Sussexes have moved on. They don't care to hoots whether he's frankly alive or dead anymore, and probably they prefer him to disappear. I mean, that's the problem with the Sussexes. They are only interested in themselves. All the talk about helping society and generosity towards the underdog is all just really puff for themselves. And you've got to judge the Sussexes by the way they've treated Thomas Markle, which is appallingly. They have no compassion for a man who deserves it. And unfortunately, it's going to get worse as he gets older and sicker. And even, that was the most astonishing thing, when he had his stroke, Meghan left her home in Montecito, but didn't go down to Mexico to see her father, but went to the site of a school shooting instead. It was just all, of course, for the cameras.
One thing that did jump out in the book Revenge, and I think it was with an interview with Tom, and obviously Doria is a black woman, Tom was a white man, and there was a discussion. Is this right? Before Meghan was born, that there was Thomas said there was a discussion where people said, what colour would Meghan be? And that jumped out because that's a phrase or a discussion that has really come to hit the royal family in later years, you know, because Meghan mentioned it in a Oprah Winfrey interview. How damaging do you think that allegation is against the royal family of racism?
Oh, I think Meghan's allegation of racism, because it was basically completely untrue, caused huge damage for Britain's reputation, the royal family's reputation across the world, incalculable, and it still is there. I think that the way in which the Caribbean islands, Commonwealth countries, reacted, I think the way that African Commonwealth countries reacted was unbelievably negative. And of course it was completely and utterly untrue what Meghan said. And what was remarkable was that Harry contradicted her in the Netflix interview, and then afterwards denied that he even said it. I mean, they literally forgot that it was recorded. They tried to pretend they hadn't accused the royal family of racism. It just shows how short-sighted they are and how limited they are. But no, I mean, the damage was huge. It was intended to be huge. I mean, she had rehearsed that line, as she had rehearsed the whole of the Oprah Winfrey interview. And unfortunately, it has done great damage, and I don't think it can be really cured.
And there are two things here. It's really difficult for two, middle-aged, middle-class white men or whatever to talk about racism because, we maybe haven't suffered it ourselves. But it's something that you cannot defend yourself against. And it's something that the royal family will find it impossible as you talk about in the Caribbean, I went to the Caribbean tour, and the William and Catherine in the Caribbean, and that was blighted by so many problems. But it's something the royal family will have to deal with at some stage, do you think? Do you think they've reacted well enough to it? Do you think there's anything else that they can do or are doing to persuade people that we're not institutionally racist in the UK? The royal family is an inclusive organisation, that King Charles does an awful lot for communities in the UK but also abroad. Do you think the royal family are doing enough to defend themselves against this?
No, I don't, in short. I think they made a terrible mistake after the Oprah Winfrey interview of only saying recollections may vary. I thought that they should have been far, far more aggressive in rebuttal. And I think they could have then limited the damage. But they chose to, in their way, never complain, never explain. And that was a mistake, because the accusations were just so virulent. And of course, altogether, I think she said about 17 lies in that interview. And Meghan got away with it. And I think the royal family played that badly, and the consequences are there to this day.
The situation with the royal family is, as I say, that they do a lot. I mean, the king does deserve some kind of credit. The royal family do deserve some kind of credit. They have kind of changed slightly since Harry and Meghan have left. Do you think that Harry and Meghan changed the royal family dramatically? Remember, Meghan was only here for 3 years. Do you think they've had a transformative impact on the royal family, or are they just carrying on as normal and stoically just getting on with the job?
No, I think Meghan and Harry have had a hugely negative impact on the royal family. I think the damage is everlasting and continues. And I think that the tragedy is that they tried terribly hard to help Meghan. After all, Charles escorted her into the wedding in St George's Chapel. The Queen assigned over half a dozen people to look after Meghan, try and help her get into the ways of the royal family. But they could never win. We know now in hindsight that Meghan never really intended to stay. Her guest list to her wedding showed her real ambition was to be a star in California. And Harry's friends were excluded from the guest list in the evening, from the dinner. So we know that the agenda was something which the royal family could never really get to grips with. And that's why their reaction, once the assault came through the Oprah Winfrey and through Netflix interviews, was lame and self-defeating. They should have been far more aggressive in their response to assert their own credibility.
It's really interesting. I remember, reporting on it at the time and trying to get a sense of the atmosphere. And I think there was shock more than anything. I think there was almost a paralysis, particularly after Oprah. They didn't do anything until 24 hours later, because it came out in America overnight. And they said, well, we're going to wait till it appears on, I think it was ITV on the Monday evening, and then we will react. There was like a collective kind of palace deep intake of breath. It was like, what on earth are we dealing with here? But it's 3 years on now, or 4 years on now. I mean, do you think we've got over the Harry and Meghan show in the UK? Do you think we've moved on?
No, because after that was the publication of Spare, Harry's biography, which peddled even more lies and more trouble, and was, of course, again, a worldwide bestseller, because until then, the world was fascinated that two royals could be so disloyal and treacherous. They'd never had that in their lifetimes before. I think there's a waning interest in them now. People are beginning to see the truth, which I exposed 2 years ago in my book, Revenge. I mean, the truth about them is they are narcissistic and intent on self-glorification to profit from their notoriety. But at the time, no one wanted to believe it. That's always the problem with iconoclasts. They tell the truth, but no one actually wants at the time to believe it could be that bad.
Well, people have heard what they've had to say. So the last 4 or 5 years, through Spare, through Netflix, on Oprah, people have listened to what they have to say, and a lot of people their popularity has gone down since they've told their story. We can talk a lot about the past, okay? We can talk a lot about the failures at the palace, or the problems or the mistakes that Harry and Meghan committed or deliberately inflicted on the royal family. Where do they go now? Where, in 4 or 5 years' time, if we're sitting down here talking about Harry and Meghan again, and Thomas Markle, and Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal family, where are we going to be? What's the future for the Sussexes?
Well, the future for the Sussexes, I think, is pretty grim. I think that they're on a permanent decline. But they will whenever they need money, whenever they need publicity to stoke their reputation, they'll drop another little bomb. I mean, we're still waiting, of course, for Meghan's own autobiography, which I'm sure she is penning. She is a good writer, and it'll be filled with vitriol and filled with lies. I mean, she will not tell the truth because she wants sensational headlines. That is the ultimate weapon she can deploy. But I just think that the royal family at the moment here in London is a bit sad. I mean, the illnesses, of course, have undermined their attraction, undermined their visibility. And that, of course, what grieves me most is, of course, that pleases Meghan and Harry. They are the epitome of good health. And there's Charles and Camilla and, of course, Kate, all unwell. And that, of course, is a great tragedy for us.
Well, they have been quiet. I mean, I don't remember Meghan saying anything for months and months and months, possibly last year, maybe. I mean, she's been incredibly quiet. Can we give them some kind of credit here? Have they reined in their attacks because they understand that the King and Princess of Wales are seriously unwell?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that she's allowed Harry to make the running. I mean, she is reserving herself for her autobiography. It's much better for her to be seen as the silent princess or duchess, the silent weapon in reserve. I mean, Harry, after all, has said some pretty unfortunate things when he came across and didn't see his father on his way to Nigeria. But Nigeria said it all. The visit to Nigeria, you didn't need words from Meghan to say what it was all about. It was about, we are the royal family in a Commonwealth country, the most important probably in Africa. And that said it all. It was a brilliant coup. Put the British royal family, our royal family, into a very, very difficult position, intentionally so. And that unfortunate occurrence is, again, the palace should never have agreed. They should have lobbied the Nigerians not to allow the Sussexes to come because, of course, they were upstaged in a vitally important Commonwealth country.
So spinning it forward, are you concerned? Because I'm led to believe that they will do more of these trips. You know, this suited them because I was at the Invictus Games last September and the Nigerian Defence Minister turned up and he sat at the front with Harry and Meghan. I think this is where it all started, their trip to Nigeria, because Meghan had said she was a certain percentage Nigerian heritage. What are the pitfalls that they could fall in? Or what's the problems they can cause to the royal family if they end up having more royal tours around the world?
Well, of course they will, as the royal family, because of Charles's and Kate's illnesses, are unable to travel as much as they would like or travel at all. The presence of Meghan and Harry in Commonwealth countries will be absolutely damaging to the royal family. And that, of course, is a serious problem because, after all, Anne can't travel and, William rightly feels he should be with his own children and wife. So it's very difficult. The only question is whether the British Foreign Office and number 10 can persuade Commonwealth countries not to host Meghan and Harry because it's damaging.
In what way is it damaging, Tom?
Well, it's damaging because they appear as royals. They appear as representatives of the British royal family, and they're
not.
Like a
rival royal court, so
exactly, and they're not. They are doing it for their own self-promotion, to profit from their association with the royal family, the same royal family who they deserted and have humiliated and have damaged. And that's the problem, that Meghan delights in this. But what's interesting is that she's really so unpopular. Despite her unpopularity in America now, and obviously in England, she still manages always to create, understandably, a furor when she travels. And that is her intention because she loves the spotlight. Everything is geared to her self-promotion.
Well, the self-promotion was always going to be the problem. So, when the late Queen signed off on the Megxit agreement, it was that they couldn't use the royal titles to make themselves money. They couldn't use HRH. They couldn't use Sussex Royal. That was the key, the key settlement part of the settlement that really stopped them from doing what they wanted to do. Do you feel, therefore, that they are pushing the boundaries and that maybe they are overstepping the line and maybe the King needs to step in again?
Well, I think there are two things there. First of all, the problem is that they betrayed. They actually, in the end, ignored the agreement that they settled on because allegedly they were going to California for privacy and to leave the royal family. And they've done the exact opposite. But I think part of the problem has been the weakness of the King. He should never have allowed agreed for their children to get royal titles after the Queen's death. And he should have stripped them of their titles and actually made a declaration that they're no longer representatives or members of the royal family. But Charles prevaricated. He's terrified of, in any way, creating new enemies, so to speak. But I think as well, Charles has behaved weakly because he feels guilt. He feels guilt that Harry keeps on repeating that his great misery and just self-destruction has been the death of his mother and how appalling that has been. But I mean, Harry doesn't understand his own mother, and Charles understandably feels the guilt whatever he does, because obviously he wasn't a great husband to Diana and wasn't a great father either when he abandoned Harry and William very often at weekends to go and meet Camilla.
Well, that's always the problem I find when I'm talking about the royal family, is that, you know, they're not politicians. This is a family, so the dynamic is father and son. So although, you know, we talk about the kind of impact on the country or the impact on the royals, it is a family dynamic where he's still Harry's father, and you know, they're bonds, you know, between a father and son that, you know, you can only understand if you're a father yourself or a son yourself. So that relationship between them kind of undermines every decision that the king makes. So I kind of, you know, you in your book, interestingly, we'll get onto it on Rebel Prince, you do paint quite an unfavourable portrait of the king. I personally think since the king's taken over, I've changed my mind on him. I was a little bit nervous about him, and I think he's doing a wonderful job. And I've kind of come round to him after kind of seeing him in action. What's your thoughts on the king since he's taken over? Have you changed your mind from, as I say, well, many people think was an unfavourable portrait of him in your book?
Well, my book, Rebel Prince, now called Rebel King, was very unflattering about Charles. I mean, his period as king, as prince, has been most unfortunate. There are many, many things which he did which were disastrous. I think he learned from the book, funnily enough. Yep. I think that he changed after the book came out and exposed so many of the wrongdoings which he'd done, whether it's about loyalty, whether it's about money, whether it's about the way he travelled, about some of his passions, like, for example, natural medicine, I mean, alternative medicine. All these things he changed his attitude on. And, of course, he was rightly praised for his environmental stuff, although when it came to architecture, although I think it was right, the way he went about it was very wrong. But, I mean, I think the point about it is that Charles became king and everyone wanted him to succeed, because we are monarchists and we want the monarchy to succeed. Therefore, everyone had to get behind Charles and hope that he'd be very careful and not make the same mistakes as he'd made as prince.
The interesting thing about the king that particularly happened this year, his biggest challenge is his health scare. When he started the job, I think he just had to get to the coronation. He got to the coronation, and then he really wanted to hit the ground running and, you know, and achieve, because he'd been waiting for such a long time to become king. How do you think he's coped with with his health scare, with his cancer? They've been open about it, but we still don't know I still don't know what cancer it is, and he's right to keep it secret. How do you think that he has dealt with this massive challenge, this cancer scare? Well,
brilliantly. I mean, I do think, you know, he's been courageous. It has been extraordinarily difficult for him. And, you know, in the end, he's mortal too and doesn't want to die. And he's had to face the ultimate, was he going to live or die? And that, for any person, whether a king or a pauper, is a shocking challenge to meet. So I think on the whole he's done very well. And I think the public have switched. Were pretty sceptical about Queen Camilla. I mean, and they've turned and said we support her because, as I say, we're monarchists and we want them to succeed. It's been very difficult for him. You know, I don't think he'll ever get anywhere near the admiration and love there was for his mother. That is impossible for him to succeed in doing. And the tragedy is that we all hope that William and Kate would inherit that mantle of being loved, and her illness, again, is a terrible blow to the royal family. So, full marks to King Charles and Camilla. They've done the best they could in the circumstances. But it's a challenge. It's a perpetual challenge.
Yeah, I worried it would kind of define his era, but he does seem to be coming out of it. Just a little bit on the Princess of Wales. The way that she's dealt with her cancer has been entirely different. We know far less about it. It was kept, you know, away from public scrutiny for a long period of time, and we haven't seen much of her. What do you think about the difference in them dealing with their illnesses?
Well,
they
I
are
think
public figures. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that there was a period where Kate, clearly, where people were saying what's wrong with her, and the trolls were inventing all sorts of falsehoods. And I think the palace played it appallingly at that stage and landed her with that dreadful situation where she did the Photoshop photograph, which was just a tragedy and self-inflicted wound. They could have avoided all that if they'd only been, they thought far more carefully about it. Well, you know, the trouble is she's a mother. She's clearly very ill. It has been a huge shock for her because she's so young, and cancer amongst young people has a terrible record compared to older people. So she rightly feared for her own life and for her children. So I do think, you know, we all saw at Wimbledon, she was terrific and rightly huge applause for her. But it does, again, it poses a great challenge and it poses an existential threat. And that's, again, at these times where the one thing which is secure in the British way of life is the monarchy. And whatever happens in politics or tragedies like COVID, the rock-solid existence of Britain is identification with its monarchy. And at the moment, of course, that is a problem because of their illnesses.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm just wondering, on just going back to Rebel Prince, just a thought jumped into my head. If you were to rewrite that book now, Rebel King, as you referenced earlier, to call it Rebel King, would you paint a more favourable portrait of Charles?
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, the Charles I describe is the real Charles. I think he then changed, he had to. But I think his relationship with Michael Fawcett, his aide, his relationship then previously in the trial of Paul Burrell, Diana's aide, accused of stealing all her possessions, his attitude towards his own staff, many of whom were very, very angry with him because of his disloyalty, his relationship with architects and things like that, all of that was true at the time. And I think damaged the image of the royal family. I mean, most of all, of course, his relationship with money, which he needed to raise for his charities, which presented huge conflicts of interest, which his own father warned him about, which he ignored. And now, of course, he has to take into account.
Well, he did say on his, you know, when he had his accession speech, or when he was at Buckingham Palace, that he will have to change and has to, you know, give up certain parts of his role. Now he's no longer the Prince of Wales. So I think a lot of the things that you go into heavy detail in there, he has to leave behind.
He does.
He's now king.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's fitted into that role. But I think there's a weariness as well about him. I think that whereas he was a rebel, he liked provoking and he liked causing trouble. I think now he's more interested in survival and having a quieter life. There are various anecdotes in that book which one can't imagine him now repeating.
Well, there may be a frustration. I mean, there may be a frustration that he can't do as king what he could do as Prince of Wales.
He's a man of 75.
Yeah.
He's finally happy in the sense that he's got his wife and then stricken with illness.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a resignation. I think there is a battle for survival. And in the end, you see, the thing about Charles is he wants there to be a Carolingian era. He'd love there to be buildings or train lines or something named after him. At the moment, he's just got one postbox with his name on it. And it's very frustrating for an intelligent and very sensitive man who wants to make his mark on history, that it's to some extent limited.
Well, let's say I've really come around to him, the more and more that I actually do work on him. And the jobs that I go to, the amount of people that actually want to come out and see, and I find they want to come out and see the king. So that's always the thing. Do they want to come out and see Charles, or do they want to come out? That's the king over there. And he's no longer the Prince of Wales. He's no longer Rebel Prince. He is the king. And I've sensed a change in his personality. But
well, absolutely. The point is, we're monarchists on the whole, the majority. And of course, we don't just see the man. And he is very good with people. There's no doubt. And he does take a real interest when he's talking to people about what they believe in, who they are, and all the rest of it. He has a genuine interest, and that's terrific about him. But in the end, people want to see the institution, and there's a sort of magical mystery about him in that sense.
One new friend he does have is David Beckham. And so obviously your latest book, or most recent book, House of Beckham, talks about the former England captain, absolute legend in the UK. But one element in the book was the falling out with Harry and Meghan. We often got whispers and wind that there was there was something going on? Because they were friends. David Beckham was an ambassador for the Invictus Games. Tell us what you found out about that relationship.
Well, I think what happened was that Meghan had a habit of having freebies. She liked everything given to her when she was an actress in Canada, and she wanted freebies from Victoria Beckham's fashion line. And the palace said to her, you can't do that. And there was a sort of frisson about that. And then she did get some advice on makeup, and she thought it was confidential. Somehow it got leaked to the press. She blamed the Beckhams for doing it. There was a very unfortunate telephone conversation when Harry accused David Beckham of leaking this help on the makeup. Victoria was furious because she hadn't leaked it, and they all became very, very messy. And then he's invited to Sydney for the Invictus Games by Harry. And he goes to Sydney with his wife and family. They leave England under very, very unfortunate circumstances where there's big question marks about the state of the Beckhams' marriage. And David turns up in Sydney at the stadium to meet Harry and be photographed at the Invictus Games, and is snubbed, is effectively told that Harry doesn't want to see him, having flown all the way around the world. And again, I mean, it shows bizarre behaviour by the Sussexes. The Beckhams have to swallow it. It is all just pretty odd.
Is this another example of the ghosting that we were talking about earlier, where people become friends with Harry and Meghan, then for whatever happens, they suddenly just turn their back on them?
Yes, it would, except that then, clearly they made up, because Meghan turns up at Westminster Abbey at a Commonwealth Day service wearing one of Victoria's clothes, right, which one assumes she got free or something. But I mean, it just shows you the level of the relationship between these so-called celebrities. Everything in the end comes down to money and mutual appreciation and mutual back-scratching.
What can we read into the fact that David Beckham, no longer friends with Harry and Meghan, has now aligned himself with the King? Is that the direction of travel for other superstars, not just superstars, but kind of world leaders or movers and shakers in the world? Is that where other people will start heading? Well,
not start, they always have. I mean, to appear in a photograph with the King has always been a sort of a big plus sign. And of course, for Beckham, who is desperate always to get his knighthood and be part of the establishment, the photograph of him with the King was worth a lot. I mean, I wouldn't put it as much as friendship. I think there's a mutual interest in all this. I think the King will find Beckham not the greatest ally. He won't get him any money. But on the other hand, for Beckham, it looks good because he's standing next to the King. But then many people stand next to the King. So I don't think it's anything remarkable at all.
Oh, well, they bonded over honey, apparently.
Well, the newspapers say that. They can bond over honey. But, Charles by now and his officials know exactly the value of a photograph, and it didn't damage either of them. But it's not, in my view, it's a sensational development.
But there is a kind of movement, this is what I'm getting at, of people either being snubbed by the Sussexes or moving away from the Sussexes.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt at all that the Sussexes have alienated huge numbers of people, not only in Britain, especially in Britain, but also now in California. I mean, the whole point is that they suck. They suck from people. They want to be aligned with famous people to improve their own status. And they're finding more and more people moving away from them. Because in America, they're far, far more transactional than in Britain. And what do I get by being next to Meghan and Harry? Well, right now, if you're an American, you get very little by being next to two people who are the subjects of so much criticism.
Well, I think we discussed this the other week with on a previous show where I think it's Mary Tillman, the mother of the NFL and the war hero. Harry picked up the award where she called him a divisive and controversial figure. And I feel that phrase, along with effing grifters, are things that are currently associated to Harry and Meghan that are going to stick around. They are divisive figures. They are controversial figures, and that's a problem that they will need to solve.
Well, I don't think they can solve it. I mean, in the momentum is either up or down. If they disappear entirely from view, they lose credibility, lose value, lose worth. And if they're in public view, like the Tillman Award or other awards that she has received, or their ridiculous trip to New York when they were claimed to be chased by the paparazzi, they can only lose. And the trouble with the Sussex is they are losers now. They are people who don't have credibility. There are people in the end who suffer from being worthless. What do they contribute to society? That is their problem, and they're constantly seeking a role. But in my view, they're going to find it very, very difficult till I write the second volume called Downfall.
Well, on that note, we should stop speaking about the Sussexes. But I just want to wish Thomas Markle, obviously, we wish him a happy birthday and wish him the best of health.
Exactly.
80 years old, it's quite remarkable. Going through a similar health scare, or going through a health scare just like the King of England is. So we wish them, and the Princess of Wales, we always wish them the best of health. Right, to finish off, we have our quickfire questions.
Yeah.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, first one. If you could sit down and interview Harry and Meghan, what would be your first question?
Why were you so treacherous?
Do you think they'd answer?
Well, I demand an answer.
We may have touched on this earlier, but where do you see Harry and Meghan in 10 years' time?
I think struggling for survival financially and reputationally. It'll be getting worse all the time. In 10 years' time, I think they'll be hitting a nadir.
Will we be still talking about them?
We will, because they will always push themselves into the public view, into the media, because that'll be their only oxygen of survival.
Okay. Who do you believe has been the most damaging figure to the royal family's reputation?
Well, it's got to be Meghan and Harry, nobody else.
Okay.
And Prince Andrew.
Well, how do you assess Prince Andrew's current position within the royal family?
Dire. I mean, a real problem, and he should be invisible. And I think I blame the King for not having been far, far more authoritarian, ordering Prince Andrew to stay out of public view. I mean, when he appeared for that memorial service right in the front row, that was a catastrophic mistake.
Well, again, they're family members, they're brothers, they have relationships, that we don't maybe understand.
But in the end, the problem with Charles is that he doesn't have the very best staff around him who are absolutely determined to say sometimes no. Because Charles, as I showed in my book, always fires people who say no. He wants people who are yes men around him. And his staff should have said to Andrew, back of the queue. You're not going to stand in the front.
Well, I may have said this before, but I was there and Andrew came bowling down the hill and we said, why is Andrew at the front? And they said, oh, he's actually at the back. Because the royal protocol is that the senior royals appear at the back. But it doesn't take a genius to, it's a terrible look.
Well, he pushed himself to the front with a wife, ex-wife, who equally rather pushy.
Which royal family member do you think is the most misunderstood by the public?
Well, most misunderstood is probably Princess Anne in the sense that she is a rock. And I think people appreciate her a lot. But I think she deserves greater understanding.
Okay, we may have touched on this, but do you think Harry will ever be back?
No, I don't. I think Harry has made himself, for the King, an outcast, and I'm certain that William, his brother, will never forgive him.
And which member of the royal family do you think handles public scrutiny the best?
Well, Anne. I think she's done brilliantly. I mean, she had a controversial life often, but she has handled it by her hard work and her solid behaviour and an unbelievable generosity and all the rest. So I think Anne is sort of a beacon of greatness for the royal family.
I've got one more that's not on my list that I just want to throw your way. Which member of the royal family who you haven't written an in-depth biography or book about would you want to?
Well, my problem with that is I only write about living people, but if it was a dead person, it would be Prince Philip, because I do think that the truth about Philip has eluded most biographers because they've all been far too syrupy, and there's a truth about Philip. But I suppose if there's one more to write, it would be about King Charles. In 3 or 4 years' time, his reign, I mean, so far glowing and all the rest of it, but what has actually happened over the last years since he was crowned in the first 4 years will be fascinating, because he, in the end, has had to cope with huge problems, not least the changing of the prime ministers and governments and the mood of Britain. And I'll be interested to see how he manages that.
Okay, well, I look forward to reading both of those, okay? So tell me when you do. Thank you so much for coming on. Fantastic stories, great opinions, and I've really enjoyed having you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates.